I need to write this story directly. Let me check the skill file for any relevant guidance first, then write. Not relevant, this is a UID skill. Writing the story directly now. I walked through my own front door at 4 in the afternoon on a Wednesday and found 47 people sitting in white chairs in my backyard. I know it was 47 because I counted them later, standing at the kitchen window with a glass of water I'd poured but couldn't drink. At the time, all I registered was the color. Navy suits, blush dresses, a flower arch I had never seen before, threaded with white roses and eucalyptus, and the fact that my boyfriend of 3 years was standing under it in a charcoal suit, and my best friend was walking toward him in a dress the color of cream, and every single one of the guests had their back to me. I had flown home from Halifax day early. My conference had ended Thursday instead of Friday because 2 of the panelists had canceled last minute, and the organizers decided to cut the final day rather than reschedule. I'd texted Liam from the airport. I'd texted Bridget too, my best friend, my person, the woman who had a key to my house and had used it to set up a wedding in my backyard while I was gone. Neither of them had answered. I told myself they were probably together. I was right about that part. I need to go back a little, because none of this makes sense without the parts that came before. I'm Vera. I'm 38 years old. I teach high school English at a school in Waterloo, Ontario, and for 3 years I shared my life with a man named Liam, who taught gym at the same school, which is how we met, the way a lot of people meet. Over bad coffee in the staff room, then over better coffee somewhere else, then over everything. Liam moved into my house 14 months into our relationship. That was my idea. The house had been mine for 6 years by then, a semi-detached on a quiet street that I'd bought with the life insurance money after my mother died. It was too much space for one person, and I was tired of all the quiet. He said he'd put money toward the mortgage. He said that every few months for the 2 years he lived there. He never did. I want to be clear, I knew that. I saw the bank statements. I told myself it was fine because he was saving up, and then I told myself it was fine because I wasn't hurting for money, and then I stopped telling myself anything and just let it go the way you let things go when you don't want to look at them too closely. Bridget was my best friend for 11 years. We'd met in a pottery class, both of us bad at it, both of us there because we'd seen the same article about creative hobbies reducing cortisol, and we'd been close ever since. She lived 20 minutes away. She'd sat with me when my father had a health scare last spring. She knew my coffee order and my deepest fears, and the specific way I got quiet when something was bothering me before I could name it. She had a spare key to my house because she'd watered my plants during a trip to Vancouver the previous summer. I had never asked for it back. The conference was in Halifax, a professional development thing for English teachers, 3 days of panels and workshops and evenings at a hotel bar with people I'd see again in a year. I'd told Liam I was leaving Monday morning and coming back Friday evening. I told Bridget the same. I texted them both Monday before I boarded the plane. I got back 2 responses that were just emojis. Safe travels. Have fun. The last night in Halifax, I had dinner with a woman named Frances who taught in Fredericton and had come to the same conference 2 years running. We talked for 3 hours. I told her things I hadn't said out loud in a while, that I sometimes felt like I was holding my life together alone, that I loved my house, but lately it felt like a hotel someone else was staying in, that I was tired in a way sleep wasn't fixing. She said, "That kind of tired usually means something needs to change." I flew home the next morning. The Uber from the airport cost $34. The driver had a Little Trees air freshener hanging from the mirror and was listening to a hockey podcast. I looked out the window at the flat October sky and thought about what I'd make for dinner Whether I should stop for groceries, whether Liam would want to go for a walk. Normal thoughts. Ordinary thoughts. The kind you have when you don't know your life is about to split open. I unlocked my front door at 4:10. I stepped into my front hallway, and I heard music. Something acoustic, low, the kind of thing that gets played at weddings. And laughter, and the sound of chairs. And I stood there with my suitcase still in my hand, and I looked through the house to the back door, which was propped open, and I saw the chairs, the guests, the arch. I didn't make a sound. I set my suitcase down against the wall very quietly, like I was trying not to disturb something, and I walked to the glass door, and I stood there and I looked. Bridget was halfway down the aisle. She was wearing a floor-length dress with lace sleeves, and her hair was done up in a way I'd never seen before, pinned and soft at the same time. She was carrying a bouquet of white ranunculus. She was smiling at Liam. Liam was looking at her like she was the only thing in the world. The officiant, a man I didn't recognize, was reading something. I couldn't hear the words through the glass. I watched Bridget reach the arch. I watched her hand Liam the flowers and then take both his hands. I watched the guests around them with their faces full of joy, not one of them looking back at the house. I pushed the door open. I don't know what I expected. I don't know what I was thinking, honestly. I wasn't thinking. My body just moved. The door made a sound when it hit the frame, and someone in the back row turned, and then someone else turned, and then there was this ripple through the crowd, heads turning one by one, and then Liam saw me and went completely still, and then Bridget turned and saw me, and her face did something I had never seen it do before. Not guilt, exactly. Something worse, something calculating, a flicker of adjustment before she rearranged it into something softer. Vera, Liam said. My name in his mouth, after everything I'd just seen, was the strangest sound I'd ever heard. I didn't yell. I want to be clear about that because I think sometimes people expect a woman in that situation to scream, to cry, to fall apart in a way that lets everyone else feel like the stable one. I didn't do any of those things. I looked at him across 47 people and I said, "Everyone needs to leave my property, now." There was a silence that lasted maybe 4 seconds. Then someone in the third row started gathering their things, and that started the rest of them, and within 10 minutes my backyard was emptying. Some people looked at me with a kind of stunned sympathy. Some people didn't look at me at all. The officiant left first. He didn't say anything to me. That was fine. Liam stayed. Bridget stayed. I went into my kitchen and I put the kettle on because I needed something to do with my hands, and after a moment Liam came in and stood in the doorway and said, "I can explain." I turned around and looked at him. 3 years of mornings. 3 years of grocery lists and weekend drives and fallings asleep on the couch and thinking, this is it. This is the person. This is the rest of my life. And here he was in a charcoal suit in my kitchen, where he had never paid a single dollar toward the mortgage, and he was telling me he could explain. Then explain, I said. He talked for a while. The version he told me was complicated and self-serving, the way those versions always are. The core of it was this. He and Bridget had been together for 8 months. It had started, he said, as nothing, as a friendship that crossed a line, and then it had become something real, and he hadn't known how to tell me. He said he loved me. He said he loved her too. He said he hadn't wanted to hurt anyone. "Why here?" I asked. He looked confused. "What? Why did you plan a wedding in my house?" "In my backyard." There was a pause. Then he said, "The venue we'd booked fell through. Last month. We couldn't get our deposit back, and we didn't have another option, and Bridget said you were going to be away." I thought about that. I thought about what it meant. That they had planned this wedding, booked a venue, put down a deposit, all while he was living in my house, sleeping in my bed, eating the food from my refrigerator. I thought about the 8 months he said it had been, and I counted backwards to May, and May was when I'd lent him $4,000 for what he said was a problem with his car lease. He'd said he'd pay me back in a few months. I thought about the spare key in Bridget's purse. I thought about Francis in Halifax saying, "That kind of tired usually means something needs to change." "I need you to leave now," I said. Liam said he didn't have a plan. He said this plaintively, like it was a logistical problem I might help him solve. He said he needed a few days to figure things out. I said, "You're not staying in this house." Bridget had come in from the backyard by then. She was still holding her bouquet. She set it on my kitchen counter, on my counter, in my house, and she said, "Vera, I know this is devastating. I know, but can we just what?" I said. She stopped. I had known Bridget for 11 years. I had talked to her about my fear of being alone, my grief after my mother died, the ways I sometimes felt invisible in my own relationship. I had told her everything. And she had been sleeping with my boyfriend for 8 months and had stood at the altar with him in my backyard this afternoon and set her bouquet on my counter. "I want you to take your flowers and your dress and your fiancé," I said, "and I want you to leave, and I want my key back." She put the key on the counter next to the flowers. They left. Liam took a bag he'd apparently packed ahead of time. I found the space in the closet where his clothes had been later that evening, and they walked out my front door, and I locked it behind them and stood in my hallway alone. The arch was still in my backyard. The white chairs were mostly empty now, but some were knocked sideways. There were flowers scattered across the grass and a table near the fence still holding a half-eaten tiered cake with ivory fondant and small pressed flowers. I went outside and I looked at all of it for a long time. Then I called my friend Denise, not Bridget, obviously, not anymore, and I told her what had happened, and she drove over immediately and sat with me while I cried for the first time that day. "I didn't even cry in front of them," I said. "I know," she said. "That's you." Over the next few days, I started to learn the shape of what had actually happened. Some of it I pieced together myself. Some of it came from people who had been at the wedding, mutual acquaintances who texted me with apologies and eventually information. Liam hadn't paid the car lease problem. He'd used the money to put down a deposit on an apartment. A one-bedroom he and Bridget had been splitting the cost of, their own private space, while he continued to live in my house. He'd been keeping that apartment for 7 months. I went to my bank and asked about joint credit. It turned out Liam had applied for a credit card in both our names 11 months ago, at a time when we'd discussed briefly the idea of a joint account. We'd decided against it. I'd thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. He'd gone ahead anyway, apparently forging enough of my details to get it approved, and he'd run up just over $3,000 on it. Groceries, gas, 3 weekends at a hotel in Niagara-on-the-Lake that I now understood had not been solo fishing trips. I called a lawyer. Her name was Helen, and she had an office on King Street, and she was calm and practical in a way I found enormously comforting. She told me that what he'd done with the credit card was fraud. She helped me write letters. She helped me understand what I was owed and how to pursue it. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't simple, but it was something I could do, and doing it helped. I contacted my bank. I froze the joint account he hadn't been supposed to open. I documented everything. I also dismantled the flower arch myself. I don't know why that felt important, but it did. I took it apart piece by piece in my backyard on a Saturday morning with a pair of scissors and a cup of coffee, and I put the flowers in the green bin and the metal frame at the curb, and when I was done, I stood in the empty yard, and it was just my yard again. Just the fence and the grass and the old maple my mother had liked, its leaves going orange at the edges. There were things I had to grieve separately. The relationship, yes, but also the friendship, and that one was harder, in some ways, because I hadn't expected it. You expect the possibility of losing a boyfriend. You don't build your emotional life around the assumption that your best friend is capable of something like this. Denise told me later that she'd had a feeling about Bridget. That's the thing people say, after, and maybe it's true and maybe it's hindsight, but it didn't help me. What helped me was time and honesty, and the slow process of understanding that what I'd lost was something that had already been hollowed out before I found out. That's a hard thing to accept. The relationship I was mourning hadn't been real for at least 8 months. I was grieving something that had already ended. I just hadn't been told. I think about Francis sometimes on that last night in Halifax. That kind of tired usually means something needs to change. Something changed. Not in the way I would have chosen. But I live in my house with my plants and my mortgage and my students who always have questions about the books that take me by surprise. And I have Denise. And I have Helen, who made sure I was compensated for what was taken from me. Liam paid back the $4,000 and settled the credit card balance, or he would have been facing a fraud charge. And I have the yard, which is mine again, in a way it hadn't felt in a long time. Last month I bought a bird feeder. I put it near the maple. In the mornings I drink my coffee at the kitchen window, and I watch the chickadees come and go, and I think about how quiet it is, and how the quiet feels different now. I had stopped being able to tell the difference between being alone and being lonely. I know the difference now. That's the thing about finding out the truth, even when the truth is devastating. It gives you back the ground under your feet. I walked through my own front door, and the world cracked open, and on the other side of it I found something I hadn't had in a long time. I found out where I actually stood.